These events, inviting Elena to join him, surprised, Elena grasped the soldier's hand, expressing excitement about the possibility of fun activities. As Gizllin observed, he realized that the two soldiers accompanying them, Jamal and Philip, were traitors. He struggled to comprehend how these men, once the most trusted knights of their household, and known for protecting Elena since her childhood, could betray them. It was common knowledge that they had sacrificed their lives to defend her in the past. With a smile, Jamal welcomed Elena to the supposed event. To her astonishment, the area was desolate and unkempt. She questioned Jamal about the likelihood of an event being held in such a place, to which he nervously replied that preparations were likely delayed, but that attendees would arrive soon. Elena assumed he was joking and teased him about performing in such a shabby location. While the conversation continued, Gizllin surveyed the surroundings. Despite its appearance as an abandoned street, he noticed that escape routes had been carefully blocked, indicating premeditated preparations. Elena, tugging at his arm, suggested leaving Jamal, however urged her to stay and watch the performance. But Elena refused, stating that she had no interest in remaining in such a place. Gizllin asked his sister if she worked out playfully, commenting on her strength before she could respond. Philip appeared with a menacing expression, asking Elena to wait. Alarmed, Elena accused the two men of acting strangely and questioned whether something was wrong. Jamal apologized for frightening her, and with an unsettling demeanor mentioned a request that had been received. As Jamal spoke, three men entered the area. Two were dressed in black, while the leader wore a blue coat and matching hat. This man, named Frank, commended the traitors on their efficiency. Jamal approached Frank, announcing that they had delivered their mistress as promised, and stating that their deal was now concluded. Frank noticed Gizllin's presence and expressed dissatisfaction, noting that he had not asked for him to be brought along. With a nervous grip on her brother, Elena held on tightly, as Jamal, smiling, declared that Gizllin had foolishly followed them, unaware that he was walking into his graveyard. Gizllin questioned Jamal, asking if he truly believed he could escape after betraying them. With a smug expression, Jamal dismissed the concern, suggesting that Gizllin should worry about himself. He explained that he and his ally could simply flee to a distant land. Jamal elaborated that they had grown tired of the impoverished county, plagued by barbarian raids, and noted that many others were leaving as well as he spoke. Gizllin closed the distance and struck, slicing through Jamal's armor in a single blow. The sight stunned everyone present as Jamal's body fell apart. Gizllin coldly remarked that those who left before never tried to sell out their own people. Turning to Philip, Gizllin demanded to know if he was wrong. Philip quickly seized Elena, cursing Jamal and calling him an idiot. He expressed disbelief that a knight could fall to an amateur before Philip could draw his sword. Gizllin hurled his blade, striking Philip's forehead and killing him instantly. Elena rushed to her brother's side. One of the men in black, still processing the scene, asked Frank if the young man before them was truly Gizllin. Another commented that Gizllin had no prior combat experience or formal training. Frank confirmed their observations, though he admitted he found it difficult to believe the sight of Gizllin eliminating two knights so swiftly using mana-infused strikes was unexpected. Trembling, Elena asked Gizllin to explain what was happening. Instead of responding, he struck her neck, rendering her unconscious. Gently placing her on the ground, he told her to rest for a while. Frank, watching this, thanked Gizllin for simplifying their task. He noted that Gizllin was far more formidable than expected, and revealed that they had intended to deal with Jamal and Philip themselves. Lighting a pipe, Frank inquired whether Gizllin had been concealing his true abilities all along. Gizllin retrieved his sword from Philip's head, and with a measured tone asked why Frank was so interested in his skills. As he examined the group, Gizllin dismissed the men in black as insignificant threats. Frank, however, was different. The sheer mana he exuded was on a completely different level. Recognizing the danger, Gizllin resolved to finish the battle, quickly releasing his mana. He prepared a set of strings before engaging. He demanded to know who had issued the order. Frank mockingly replied that it was pointless for a dead man to know such details. Realizing they would not give up the information willingly, Gizllin readied himself, stating that the truth would soon come out regardless. One of Frank's subordinates asked if they should decapitate Gizllin. Frank ordered them instead to capture him alive and break all his bones, ensuring he would lose his sanity. With a sinister smile, Frank added that Gizllin's screams of agony would make for a perfect masterpiece. At Frank's command, the two men charged at Gizllin. Gizllin reached into his pocket and hurled a firecracker at one of the attackers. The sudden distraction caused the man to falter, and in that moment, Gizllin closed in and delivered a fatal stab to his head. The remaining subordinate scoffed, calling it a cheap trick, before launching his own attack. Gizllin swiftly maneuvered his sword behind him to block the strike as the two locked weapons. Gizllin gripped his blade tightly, using it to strike the man's hand before the man could recover. Gizllin executed a swift strike, severing his head as Frank launched a sudden attack. Gizllin deflected it with the second sword. Frank was stunned, unable to comprehend how Gizllin managed to block from such an awkward position, believing his ambush to have been flawless. Frank was caught off guard. Gizllin quickly shoved Frank's sword downward and rose to his feet, delivering a clean slash across Frank's neck, causing his pipe to fall to the ground. To Gizlin's astonishment, Frank retaliated almost immediately, using mana to reinforce his neck. Frank admitted his surprise and stated that he would have lost his neck if not for his concentrated mana. Gizllin realized that the man had minimized the attack's damage by directing his mana to the critical area. Frank adopted a combat stance and questioned the origin of Gizlin's unusual swordsmanship. With a menacing smile, he promised that Gizllin would meet his end here. Shoving Gizllin backward, Frank mocked his meager mana, confidently assuring him of defeat. However, Gizllin's smile in response unsettled Frank. Frank hesitated, giving Gizllin the opportunity to parry his sword and disrupt his balance. Gizllin followed up with a swift kick to Frank's face, forcing him to retreat, wiping the blood from his mouth. Frank smirked and reminded Gizllin that such attacks were futile against his reinforced mana. Yet moments later, Frank coughed violently and collapsed to his knees. Bewildered by the unexpected potency of Gizllin's attack, Frank struggled to process how Gizllin's seemingly low mana could bypass his enhancements. Gizllin slowly approached, revealing that he had suspected someone of orchestrating his sister's demise, but never imagined the true culprit. With a piercing gaze, Gizllin unleashed his third core, dramatically amplifying his mana. Frank, visibly shaken, was unable to react before Gizllin appeared directly in front of him, moving at a speed his eyes could hardly track. Gizlin's attacks came fiercely and relentlessly, each strike heavier than the last. Despite his best efforts, Frank's arms grew numb under the barrage, and his sword was nearing its breaking point. Frank tried to regain his footing, reminding himself that excessive mana bursts typically had limited effects. However, Gizllin's surge defied his understanding. It was as if the young man had transformed entirely. Gizllin, noticing Frank's faltering defense, shattered the assassin's weapon with a decisive strike. Without hesitation, he followed through with a heavy blow to Frank's body, driving his sword deep into the assassin's torso. Frank cried out in agony, but Gizllin silenced him by gripping his throat and pinning him against the wall, keeping his blade embedded. Gizllin demanded answers, insisting that Frank reveal who had ordered the assassination. Refusing to cooperate, Frank produced a hidden blade and vowed to take Elena with him, unwilling to go down without inflicting further harm before he could act. Strings wrapped tightly around his wrist. Halting his movement, Gizllin, controlling the strings, warned Frank against making any rash decisions. With a cold, unwavering stare, Gizllin proposed a deal, promising to sheath a sword if Frank complied and refrained from further resistance. Frank was stunned to realize that the threads binding him were made with mana. He could not fathom when Gizllin had managed to create such a tool. With calculated precision, Gizllin drove his sword deeper into Frank's body, remarking that someone of Frank's caliber should be able to patch up the injury. His voice carried a chilling tone as he warned that no amount of skill would matter. Once Frank's mana core was destroyed, panic flickered in Frank's eyes as he glanced down to see Gizlin's sword glowing ominously. The assassin screamed as he felt his mana core cracking uncontrollably. Shouting at Gizllin and accusing him of madness, he warned that the backflow could cause a catastrophic explosion, obliterating the entire area, and questioned whether Gizllin intended to self-destruct. With an unflinching gaze, Gizllin coldly replied that only the unskilled made such mistakes, and assured Frank he had complete control. Frank was unnerved by Gizlin's expression and realized he wasn't bluffing. Accepting his impending death, Frank screamed and revealed that Count Desmond had orchestrated the assassination. The Count, he explained, sought a pretext to ignite a war against the Perdium and Dard families. Gizllin was taken aback by this revelation. In his previous life, such schemes were typically carried out by families Allied with Duke Deline, it infuriated him to see the Duke pulling strings from behind the scenes, while remaining uninvolved. Gizllin demanded to know if this was why Frank had targeted his sister. Frank confirmed it with a grim smile. Without hesitation, Gizllin drove his sword through the assassin's body, coughing up blood. Frank reminded him of his earlier promise to put the sword away. Gizllin smirked and asked why Frank, who had taken so many lives, was now afraid of death. Frank began to laugh, catching Gishan off guard. Moving closer, Frank declared that his death would change nothing. The Dard family's mission was already accomplished, and Perdium was destined to fall into ruin. He sneered, questioning whether anyone would listen to someone like Gizllin as Frank taunted him. Gishan grabbed the assassin's head and slammed it against the wall with a sinister smile. Gizllin declared that his rebirth after death meant everything would be different. This time, his sword began to glow brighter, and Frank's screams echoed through the air. A burst of energy erupted from Frank's mouth and exploded in the sky, like fireworks. Moments later, the assassin's lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Gizllin, breathing heavily, surveyed the scene. The body scattered around, and his unconscious sister's sleep peacefully confirmed the carnage. Satisfied that no one else was nearby, he discarded his sword, took a deep breath, and collapsed to his knees, coughing up blood, wiping his mouth. Gishin muttered that detonating 3 mana accords had once been effortless for him. As the mercenary king steeling himself, he rose and vowed not to fall here. Heading to a nearby building, he kicked the door open and found 2 bodies inside. In his previous life, a 3rd body had been discovered here alongside Alanis, this time based on Frank's earlier words. Gizllin identified one of the deceased as a son of the Degard family. The boy had been murdered alongside his escort knight. Their death staged to frame Elena as the killer. Gizllin moved the bodies, aware that revealing them would almost certainly spark a war. Deciding to eliminate all evidence, he took out a firecracker and set the building ablaze with the flames, consuming the damning proof. Gizllin carried his sister and began walking away, determined. He promised himself that his enemies would never succeed in their plans.